Here's another interesting example in these birds called galahs, these beautiful tropical birds. And then there's the pink cockatoo, which is a very similar bird, but a different species. Okay, we've got galahs up here, cockatoos here. And again, sonograms. And you can see that the song of the galah here looks a bit different than the song of the cockatoo. Okay, singing here and here. And so what happens if you take little baby galahs and put them into the nest of the cockatoo, and then they're reared by cockatoo parents. They're similar enough species that the parents will rear them. What do the galahs sing like when they've been reared by cockatoos? And interestingly, they sing songs that sound like the cockatoos, not like their native species, galah. So again, strong environmental influences on singing behavior. And again, does this mean that genes aren't involved? And again, the answer is no. This slide is an interesting picture that shows gene activity inside the brain of male birds that learn how to sing. And what we're seeing here is the activity of a particular gene. It's called a Zenk gene that's really active in the song control system of males. So we know that genes are obviously involved in making the song control system. We can even look more specifically at the brains of these male birds that learn how to sing and identify particular regions of the brain that are all involved in song learning behavior. And I'm circling these different components here that all comprise what's called this song control system. Okay, and it's the learning of songs. I should put the word learning in here. The song learning control system, and it's the way that the song is learned is the fact that there are many genes that are involved throughout the life of the bird. And I'm kind of skipping over a lot of stuff and simplifying here so that the science of it doesn't get too complicated. But there's lots of different genes. That's what these things are here. Okay, that are actually coding for enzymes. Okay, these are gene products. That's how we track gene activity. How do you know if a gene's active? Well, you see whether the protein's been produced. Okay, so synthase and dehydrogenase, these are different kinds of enzymes, which are proteins. So all of these are gene products, and we can see that they're active throughout different days throughout the development of the bird. And that these genes being turned on successively form the song control system. So the gene activity is influencing the learning in the bird. And don't worry if this doesn't make a lot of specific sense, but I'm hoping that you get the general point that I'm trying to make. So again, learning is the result of gene-environment interactions, right? Genes construct this learning system like these complex brain structures that we were just looking at. And the genes are responsive to important sensory stimuli. Like what? Like hearing others sing, right? Like hearing songs. Other kinds of environmental stimuli actually have been shown to influence song learning in birds, like the physical environment. The presence of trees and other kinds of vegetation can actually influence song learning. The social environment. There's been some fascinating studies that if you take a baby bird and raise it not in isolation, if you take a baby bird and raise it in social isolation, okay, so no other birds are around, but you play it the tape of birds, it will learn to sing the exact song on the tape, okay? And for other birds, if you raise them in social isolation from their own species, but play the tape of a different species, it'll still learn to sing its own species. It's just really pretty interesting. And in other birds, if you give them the tape of its own species, but the social environment of the second species, it learns to sing the birds that it interacts with, not the birds that it hears. Okay, so there's all these complicated experiments, and really what my main point is is the fact that both hearing songs, physical environment, and social environment, separate from the songs themselves, all influence how birds learn how to sing. So what about humans? We have a lot more that we're going to be saying about humans, but for now we can look at a certain kind of human attribute such as intelligence and ask about the relative amounts of gene versus environmental influences on that. And again, it's always both, right? But it's interesting that there's a single gene called the Compte gene, which codes for an enzyme here that I've written out for you, catechol-O-methyltransferase. And what this enzyme does is actually increases the rate of particular biochemical reactions. Okay, so people with this gene can carry out this particular biochemical reaction at a really high rate, which affects transmission between certain brain cells. So signals are just flying back and forth between these brain cells. And so humans that have this particular gene can perform better on a certain intelligence performance test. Okay, that's fascinating. But does this mean that one gene controls all of human intelligence? Okay, right? No, there are actually many genes involved, many other genes that contribute to intelligence, and some may actually even outshadow the Compte gene. Does this mean that the environment doesn't affect intelligence in humans? Okay, of course you already know the answer to that question, and that you can think of environmental factors that may influence human intelligence, such as learning and experience and environment and social environment. This slide shows the results of some classic, what are called twin studies. Okay, one of the ways that we try to figure out what's going on with humans, because we don't take them into laboratories and raise them in social isolation and play tapes to them like we do with birds, but we can do what are called comparative studies. And in this case, there's kind of a lot going on in this graph here, so I'll try to simplify it for you a little bit. MZ stands for monozygotic twins, which are the same thing as identical twins. When the egg splits and a fertilized egg splits and you have two identical offspring. So identical twins or not identical twins. People call those fraternal twins. Maternal and fraternal twins they're called sometimes, right? So the dizygotic ones, the fraternal twins, are actually just like any other sibling. Okay, so you have two eggs fertilized by two different sperm, just like you and any of your siblings, except it happens at the same time. Okay, and monozygotic twins, of course, are genetically identical. Okay, does that mean that identical twins are exactly the same in every way? And of course they're not. But what we can do with these studies is look at the relative influences of environmental factors and genetic factors on how similar people are in certain kinds of attributes like verbal ability, which is one component of IQ. Okay, it's not the only one. And again, there's a lot of other problems with these tests that we'll talk about later. Over here we have just parent-offspring comparisons. Okay, so if you're raised by your parents, you're living together, okay, and you're related to each other. Many of you may fall into this category if you were raised in the home with your parents, okay. This one here is if you were adopted, but so you're living with an adoptive parent, okay, but if we compare the child that was adopted to the parent that it no longer lives with, that's where we have this adopted apart category. Okay, so those guys are genetically related, but not environmentally related because you're not living in the home with that parent. Okay, and then here we have adoptive parent-offspring that are not genetically related, just comparing the parent to the child, to their adopted child. So that's just environmental relationship. Okay, and you can see that there are strong genetic influences, right? When they're just environmentally related, the correlation between parent and offspring is kind of low, but there's some that's there, okay? And if you look at the identical twins here, that's these guys, and let me see if I can erase some of this other stuff. Well, anyway, if we look at the twins that are identical, we can see that their correlation is up here around 76%, so that's pretty high. So this looks like an argument for genes over environment. Okay, but again, it's more complicated than that, because if you look at the situation where, if you look at twins that were reared apart, and they're not that easy to find, so you have two identical twins raised by different families, and that's what's here. Okay, so they're genetically related, but they've been living apart. There's a big difference between 50%, it's 25% different. So the environment is having this big 25% difference on this correlation. Again, this is just on one factor. Again, the bottom line here is that when you are both genetically and environmentally related, you're going to see a greater degree, generally speaking. This comparison here is interesting, where if you're genetically related, it's slightly higher than if you're both genetically and environmentally related. Right? Why should this one be higher? So there's a lot of noise in this data, and it's complicated. But again, genes and environment both influence human attributes. And as we'll see, it's the interaction, or as we've been talking about rather, it's the interaction between genes and environment that are so critical. Okay, finally we're kind of coming to this chocolate cake analogy here. And this is part of what you're going to be talking about in your discussion. You're going to be answering some of those other questions, not just what is the nature-nurture controversy and why is it so bad, but why do you think people are so hung up on it still? That's another part of that question. So I want you to think about that part. Why is it so hard for people? Okay? And this idea of the chocolate cake analogy is just the idea, the quality of this cake. If you were to take a slice of this beautiful cake here and eat it and say, wow, this is a great cake, and somebody would say, well, is the quality of that cake due to the ingredients, or is it due to the recipe? Okay, so this is a metaphor here. What are they talking about? How might genes versus environment be related to the metaphor for the chocolate cake here? And how would you talk about whether the quality of a cake is it due either to the ingredients or is it due to the recipe? Why is that a flawed question? In the same way that the nature versus nurture controversy is a flawed controversy. Okay, we will see you in class.